Hello everyone. Today we are going to understand one of the important concepts in economics, that is consumers and producer surplus. So what is consumer surplus? It is a difference between the price that consumers pay and the price that they are willing and able to pay. In other words, it is a difference between the amount, the price that you pay for a good and the maximum price that consumers are willing and able to pay. Producer surplus is the difference between the price that sellers receive and the price that they were willing and able to sell. In other words, it is the price that sellers receive for a commodity and the minimum price that they were willing and able to receive for the good or service or commodity. So let us understand producer and consumer surplus with the help of diagram. Demand curve is derived from the marginal utility of the consumer. So consumer surplus is the area beneath the demand curve and the area above price level, that is the market price. For example, let us consider a top cine movies film is set to release in a week's time. We know the enthusiasm that we have in watching that movie on the first day. So there will be people who will be ready to pay a higher price for a ticket. So those people come under this category. And let us assume that luckily we were able to get the ticket for the market price, that is 200. And the price that others paid or an individual paid for that same movie for the first show or the first day was 1000. So the consumer surplus, the surplus that we receive, is the difference between this area. That is, we paid 200. Whereas the other individual who paid for the same movie of the same star was 1000. So you enjoy a surplus of 800 rupees. So this is what we call as consumer surplus. This is the area beneath the demand curve and above the market price. Now consumer surplus is something which is happening on a daily basis, on a regular basis. For example, you can consider other things as well, like airline ticket. We know when the date is nearing the journey, or if you want to book a ticket for tomorrow's or day after tomorrow's, we know we have to pay a higher price for it. Or for any sports event, or for any sports event like that, or for any entertainment. Let's say a top comedy, stand-up comedian is coming to a town. You will be paying a higher price than usually how you pay. Or talk to sports team in cricket, playing a cricket match. There's a huge demand for it. When there's huge demand, there will be individuals who want to watch that match live in the stands. So they will be ready to pay higher price. But at the same time, there will be individuals who will be paying the market price. So you enjoy the surplus that time. The same show, the same sport event that you both are watching it for different price. So the consumer surplus is the difference between the price that you actually pay and the maximum price that the cricket match received on that day. So you enjoy a surplus of 800 rupees. So that is the same case for producer surplus. We know that the difference between the lowest price, that is the minimum price that producers were ready to get for that good or service, and the maximum price. So the area beneath the market price and above the supply curve is your producer surplus. So this shaded area becomes your producer surplus. So I hope you understood what is consumer surplus and producer surplus. Now let us look at the producer surplus and consumer surplus in a joint diagram. In this diagram, you can see we have both demand and supply curves together. We know consumer surplus is the area beneath demand curve and above market price. So the top part of it becomes your consumer surplus. So producer surplus is the area beneath the market price and above the supply curve. So this area becomes your producer surplus. You can see that there's an equal share between consumer surplus and producer surplus. So the demand curve, which represents consumer surplus, is denoted by here. The producer surplus beneath the market price and above the supply curve is denoted here. So in what situations can producer surplus and consumer surplus can increase or decrease? We know demand curve has an inverse relationship, so that is the same case for consumer surplus. When the price decreases, your consumer surplus will increase. That is, when the price decreases from PE to anything less than the equilibrium, your consumer surplus, that triangle, will increase. So when the price increases, when the price go up of the equilibrium, your consumer surplus decrease. So in other words, when there is shift in supply curve, let's assume there is a shift in supply curve. If supply has decreased because of various reasons, let's say the cost of producing the product has gone up. So what happens? The cost of the good will go up. So when that is the case, we get a new market price. So now what happens? Your initial consumer surplus was the area AEP initial. But now, because of the change in supply, your price has increased to P dash. So your consumer surplus, your new consumer surplus is the area of A, E dash, P dash. I hope for better understanding, I'll draw it in the black highlighted one is your initial consumer surplus. Now, because of the change in price, because of increase in price, your consumer surplus, that shaded area. The shaded area in red becomes your new consumer surplus, and the area shaded in black is your initial consumer surplus. So when the price decreases, when the price falls below equilibrium, we know we'll get a price somewhere here. So when that is the case, your consumer surplus will increase. The size of the area of the triangle will increase. So for producer surplus, what will be the same? We know supply curve has a direct relationship. That is the same thing here. When the price increases from your initial equilibrium, let's say your price has gone up to this point. So what happens? Your producer surplus has increased now. The initial triangle was this shaded area. Now because of change in demand, let's say that your demand curve has shifted to the right. So new demand curve D1. Now that bigger area will become your new producer surplus. We see there's an increase in producer surplus compared to the initial one. So your initial producer surplus was the area PEB, that was the initial. Now because of the increase in demand, you get a new equilibrium, and your consumer surplus, your producer surplus has increased to area P dash E dash B. So this is how the change in producer surplus and consumer surplus will be. When there is increase and when the price goes above equilibrium, your consumer surplus decreases when there is no shift in demand and supply curve. When the price falls below equilibrium, your consumer surplus will increase. For producer surplus, when the price goes above equilibrium, your producer surplus will increase. When the price falls below equilibrium, your producer surplus will fall. So consumer surplus and producer surplus together is what we call it as economic surplus or net benefits of the economy. Now, how do you calculate, how do you measure or calculate consumer surplus or producer surplus? In most of the scenarios, most of the cases, the consumer surplus and producer surplus will be in the shape of a triangle. So the area of triangle, that is half base into height, will get you the measurement, the area of the total consumer surplus and producer surplus. So while calculating height, make sure that you find the difference between the price that you actually pay and the maximum price that is there in the market for consumer surplus, and the minimum price of the product and the price that the sellers get in the market for the product. So when you find out that number and when you put in this formula half base into height, you figure out what is a consumer surplus and what is a producer surplus in the economy. But what is the relevance of consumer surplus and producer surplus? What will government do with this? Government makes best use of this consumer surplus and producer surplus, especially in the case of taxation and subsidies. Based on the type of good and based on the surplus that is enjoyed by the consumer and producer, government imposes taxes and subsidies. Even for businessmen will know how to target people, which sector that they should target, what time they should target. So based on that, especially when it comes of booking tickets, booking hotels and stuff like that, businessmen take these into consideration because they know the surplus that the maximum price that people will be ready to pay for the product. Even the elasticity, the concept of elasticity is very highly relevant here. When it is perfectly elastic, we know we get a horizontal line. When we get a horizontal line, then we know that whenever there is change in price, then you cannot change the price. So the surplus changes. there is no surplus that is enjoyed both by producer and consumer. When it is perfectly inelastic, what happens? We get a vertical. When we get a vertical demand and supply curve, the surplus that is enjoyed by them is infinite. So, producer surplus and consumer surplus is a determining factor for the government when it comes to taxation and subsidy, and it helps us in knowing where we are, how we are supposed to move in walks of life. Thank you.